Hi, Ken. Thanks for thanks for responding back. I just I just grieve that you if you're typing all of this just has to be a lot of work. And thank you that you're so interested and so willing. Okay, but I want to. I know that you indicated in your response that you really didn't have a time to do a full workup, and that's okay. Um, But let me just kind of go through your comment here. Thank you, and you are too. Unfortunately, you don't have time. Okay. I don't disagree with your statement on old writings and new writings, but you'll continue using the Old Testament and New Testament, and I'm fine with that as long as we both understand kind of what we're talking about here. But here's where I guess I would like to start. Just a note on your intro. Number one, you make note of the fact that the chronology of a Sunday resurrection doesn't fit. The only passage that potentially notes a specific resurrection on the first day of the week is Mark 16:9, and all the rest of them do not directly address the timing of the resurrection, but instead address the timing of the women. And that those passages put a no later than boundary on the resurrection, but don't indicate exactly when the resurrection happened, potentially as early as the prior evening. As I expect you know, and I did know, I've heard this, that Mark 16:9 is the last part of Mark. I didn't know it was specifically verses 16 through 9 because it's been a while since I've heard that or thought about it. Because I know we just get so many, as you allude to, I believe, just so many different. There are just so many views on what it would mean and be. But you basically go on to say that that's the one that basically says that chief first thing on the Sabbath he was risen, but you're basically saying it may not belong there. And the fact that the author of Mark, would not have used the same, you're just agreeing with what I had questioned, and that is that the author of Mark in 16:2 would not have said ti mia ton Sabbaton, but in verse 19 used pro ti Sabbaton. But let me just address, further address, because I can agree with what you're saying. You know, if literally Miaton Sabbaton is meant to be the first day of the week, which I think is what you're affirming, is that would be a correct translation. First day of the week, the next day, it's Sunday. If that is the correct translation, then it really doesn't mean that the resurrection had to happen on that same day, Resurrection Sunday. It would mean that it was, happened. It could have happened any time prior to that, including as early as the previous day in the afternoon, which would be the argument for so many of the folks who are holding for a resurrection around 3 p.m., which is the third, what is it, ninth hour? Is that right? Ninth hour? Whatever it is, 3 p.m.-ish in the afternoon, which is, would be the resurrection date. That's a full 3 days and 3 nights, full 24-hour days of being in the heart of the earth for that period of time, like Jonah was in the belly of the whale, ideally. And then when they show up the next day on Sunday, the first day of the week, no big deal because he's been risen. And I can go along with that. I can embrace that concept. But certainly waiting to the resurrection day would completely undermine the Zadokian calendar and concept, and the fact that, the timing of Jesus's Passover meal and crucifixion, etc. And really, if that's all that is to this, then it really is not a big deal. It's not something to keep talking about, and in many respects, maybe it's not anyway. I don't know, but I know that I have come to the opinion, I come to the understanding that there is Yahushua, Jesus, is the Messiah of Israel, and Israel had the Torah. And part of the Torah, the fourth command, is to remember the Sabbath and to keep it separate, keep it Kodesh. And and there's just no chance, and there's no evidence in the scriptures that I can find that Yahushua ever meant or would have gone along with changing the Sabbath day or honoring the Sabbath day on anything other than the seventh day. The idea that that we've created this Lord's Day, um, this celebration, removing and moving the Sabbath day, special day to the first day, because it's the day ideally that Paul was doing in Acts 27. There's some sort of acknowledgement that in Acts 27, that's an acknowledgement that they were now meeting and gathering on the Lord, what they're calling the Lord's Day, that Lord's special day. And then when you get into the justifications, I was just kind of refreshing on this this guy's write up here of why we worship on Sunday and further explanations. But they're all the same. And inside the church teaching, they are using the languages of this first day of the week to become the new Lord's Day, the new Sabbath day, and a writing away and a moving away from the correct celebration of Sabbath according to Israel's commands to a new Sabbath day according to church teaching, which, I've really come to believe that really, while I consider myself part of the church, the called out ones, the Kodesh, the Kodeshim, the separated ones, the anointed, separate, the church teaching that I grew up in is really idolatrous, because it's teaching me to worship an Elohim that is not the Elohim of Scripture. And so I think there is vast error. And when in the teaching of the church, and of course they've got it's hard to get anybody's ear. Unless you're really interested. And obviously there are groupings of people who are embracing Torah and Torah-based. I don't agree with many of their approaches to it all, but there are many who are approaching and embracing Torah, and they're therefore embracing Sabbath and some of the other things that go along with it. But I guess what I'm really saying, where it really maybe becomes more important to me that we parse out what's really happening with this Miaton Sabbaton, is because the church has taken advantage of it, not intentionally. I don't, all these well-meaning pastors that I know and grew up with and have sat under, they're not doing it on purpose. They don't realize it's happened, but it's happened that they have taken the church teaching, who has taken advantage of the situation to justify moving everything over to the first day of the week, because they embrace that that's the resurrection day. They follow what the Pharisees would have been following, the timeline of the Pharisees, which was a day removed, evidentially. I think it's pretty clearly evidentially in the scripture, in the gospel accounts. Yahushua celebrated the Sabbath on one day and did preparation work the day prior to the day that the Pharisees, and therefore the larger body of people, did. They were actually, Messiah had already prepared and eaten the Passover, had that night was taken, and on the next day, which would have been the Sabbath, the high Sabbath, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Sabbath, and that is the day of his crucifixion. But the Pharisees, that same day that was Yahushua's Sabbath day and the first day of unleavened bread, was the preparation day for the Pharisees. So they were actually getting ready to, and I think Yahushua was keeping because this is what the Zadokites did. He was keeping a morning to morning, a sunrise to sunrise day. And the Pharisees, who had embraced the new calendar systems that got instituted back in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes with the exiling of Onias III, they were able to bring in their calendar systems, which would have been evening to evening and a different date. That's why Onias was resisting. That's why Antiochus Epiphanes, exiled him or kicked him out, removed him. and put in his brother. So, so just a different day. And then that moves the timing of the resurrection to that first day of the week. And the church is utilizing those two things to teach that we have a new Lord's Day, that they're calling the Lord's Day, a specific day, a special day, the resurrection day that has replaced the commanded Sabbath day. So I guess what I'm really saying is, I didn't watch just before, so I'm not sure exactly what I would have said in relationship to this, but this all, obviously I did, and I remember kind of talking on it, but this all it just all represents the way I think and feel. So this issue of first, whether we take Mieto and Sabbaton to be one of the Sabbaths or the first day of the week has bearing outside of, what you and I might be discussing, where if Mary really did show up on the first day of the week, so Yahushua, Jesus, has been raised already, and he could have been raised anytime on Saturday, the seventh day, or earlier, but it didn't have to be. It's a no later day, and I do understand what you're saying there. Okay, let me move on to number 2 here. Let me pause. So in number 2, you say it feels a lot like you're concerned with reading Mia as first rather than one, is that you perceive it as fairly rare and primarily only in relation to these 9 instances in the New Testament. Well, I do think it's rare, but I also think that it seems like one would have been just as, you could find a way to make it be one. If you could say day 1 of the week, you could say, you could do lots of things to stay with one, its real meaning, rather than move to first. Although, just like I'm going to say, and as you were talking about, in English, we know that it would be that day 1 of the week would be the same thing as the first day of the week. But that's us. That's English, and that's trying to accommodate moving that Greek into English language, which, is part of the issue that we're talking about, and obviously our objective, but would not have been their objective. They weren't writing this stuff so that English readers and translators could, to translate into English. So there is a bit of this whole idea that only first is 9 times. 9 times they did it in the New Testament, and really in every one of them, it could have been one, day 1, or one of the woes and things of that nature. It could have been one as easily as first, would be one of the things that I would say. Unless, and again, I would have to defer to people who understand Greek so much better. I'm having to, and I don't want to keep saying it over and over again, but I'm having to reason this through. But I would tell you, I really appreciate it. I have learned so much because of your introduction. I have been studying and doing and working. I got this and I went back to work. I've just been finding things, and it just, it just all makes me stronger in how I speak, and that I will not be quite as naive. I'm still naive because I don't know Greek, but I'm not as naive as I was. And thank you, Ken. Okay. So you did go on to say, however, it's not that rare. And then you proceeded to show me, various passages where mieton, this word here, which is mietominos, I'm sure I'm butchering that, but this, or a version of that, occurs over and over again. And as I read through yours, I kind of noticed it, and I saw it that it's all in relation to this idea of the first day of the month in question. There's a month, could be the first month, could be the 7th month, it could be whatever, but it's the first day of that month that we're trying to capture. And literally, and I hope I'm not butchering, I tried to prepare and be as organized as I could here. Forgive me. But literally, here's what, when I pull it over, it's just literally 1 of month. And when I go to one of the sources, let me see if I can find it without spending too much time. Let me pause so just to make sure what I was saying. So I take this mieto, mieto minos, I believe is what it is. And literally it means 1 of month is what I'm seeing. And when I look at how you wrote it up, I think that is what you also said. Sorry, let me bounce around here. No, I guess you didn't actually say it specifically that this miato minos is literally one of the month, which, but literally that's what I think is being said here. And when I go to another interlinear translation here, and I go to 813 just for one to grab. Let's see, where is it? Here's Mia. They're telling me one, the month. Mia to minos. And I also note that we have the same problem. We've got an adjective. We've got a feminine adjective modifying a masculine noun. So we have to insert, according to what my understanding from you is, that we've got to align the adjective with the noun. So that's why we're inserting day to get us a feminine noun. We're inserting day, and that's how we come up with day one of the month. Day one of the month, and I think we're going to get into it in your thing versus one day. We're not going to go one day. It has to be day one because it needs to be ordinal. Because at the end of the day, this phraseology, if I can, hopefully I can say this correctly, this phraseology, when they write this, when Greek-speaking people write this, and they are leaving out, they've got this feminine adjective, masculine noun, and they say it together, just like they're doing up here with a feminine adjective and a neuter noun. They have not aligned their adjective and their noun, but clearly when I say clearly, maybe I shouldn't say it that way, but when they say this, they all know what they're talking about. Literally, it's one of the month, but they all understood that it is that if whatever month you want to choose, if it's the 7th month, they mean it is the first, chief, foremost, that first. And you could say it's ordinal, but and probably would need to be ordinal, but everybody seemed to know, it seems over and over, that they understood that it would be that first day of that month. And they didn't write it to try to help us figure out how to do it, where we would say, we're all saying first day of the month. Maybe it could be said day one of the month, which doesn't really, that's not how we speak in English. So day one of the month and first day of the month could both work, but we colloquially, and maybe idiomatically, I think is what you said, and you know more about language than I do, but certainly colloquially, we would say first day of the month. That's how we would speak it, but they weren't concerned, in my opinion, they weren't concerned with how we would speak it, whether we would do it this way or that way. All they knew is that they understood immediately upon hearing this, that they're talking about the chief day, the first day, the very first day of the month in question, over and over again. I hope I'm making sense here. And let me go back to your comments, because I noticed that really every one of these examples really had to do with a very similar thing. It's miaton minos. It's the same thing over and over again. Every single one of them was in relationship to that first day of the month in question. Every one I could see that you mentioned here. Here you, and you quit giving this information, which I hope you're not typing this. God, how do you do that? But here you quit giving that, but you just referenced more of the various words. And there are also similar examples in secular Greek, which we don't have access to. You might have access to it. I wouldn't have access to that. I mean, I suppose I could go digging and finding it, but it's just outside of what I do, and it'd be a big job for me. As you can see, it isn't rare at all, and it is frequently used in relation to temporal periods. Now, I don't know what you mean by relation to temporal periods. I don't know if you mean like periods in time, or if you're saying temporal periods like that 7th month, just referencing that. in that seventh month, that third month, that fourth month, whatever the month is in question. We're talking about day one of that month, and I think that's probably what you mean when you say relation to temporal periods, and often with day omitted but implied, just as in the 9 passages of the day. Well, if we must have a day, I think that's fine. I mean, I agree. If we must insert a day, they're not. I don't really know how to say it. In our language, we are, but literally, they are not. They are leaving it out for us, so that and I'm not speaking to you like I'm teaching. I'm trying to reiterate what I think I'm understanding. So context will tell you if they're literally leaving out a day by intention. Context is telling you whether or not you have, mia to mean one in context, literally one, like one of two or something of that nature, or whether or not it's talking about an ordinal sense, like the first day of day one or the first day, turning it into an ordinal sense. So the context is telling us how we would use it, but there is no day. But you would need a day in here, and it seems reasonable to put hemera, or whatever the correct word would be for day, if they were going to do that, in here right behind mia or before mia. I don't really know. You would know better than I do. But then that sent me off to, just check and just, what does that mean? Like we're clearly using the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures, and I was able to go do a word search and on the Septuagint, and in my word search, assuming it pulled most of them, it pulled 85 occurrences, but admittedly, in some of those occurrences, there were words that incorporated, like here, it's got what would be the words, the letters for mia inside of another word. So I ended up having to pull them all out, and what I ended up doing is just going through each of these and organizing them. So ultimately, there were 68 occurrences of mia that were just mia that I could locate by doing my word search. Of them, 45 meant this cardinal number. It was clear that the intent was one, like not ordinal, but cardinal, just meaning one. 45 times. 20 times it was ordinal. And every one of these where it used first, every one of them that I could find was in relationship to the exact same thing we were just talking about. There's a month, and we're talking about day one of that month. That was the evidence all throughout. There were 3 occurrences where neither of them really seemed to be that Haggai occurrence would be one of them. Well, there was a Haggai occurrence of it. So I just organized it, is what I'm saying, and to come up with this information. So let me go back to where we're at. So let me go back up to what you're saying. Again, it is that we are using first in these 9 occurrences up here when we don't really need to, and there is some sort of reason that the Greek-speaking communities and the translators are embracing, because it's obviously it's pervasive. Everybody is kind of doing this, and there's a reason for it, where they are finding reasons to turn mia into an ordinal and use first in the English language to get it done. And then as justification for doing this 9 times here, we're using what we can find of, in this case, it's in the Septuagint, of other uses of mia in the ordinal sense, but it was all in relationship to day one of a month. And literally, I just think it could have just as easily been translated one. Day one of the month would have been a better translation, because literally one of the month. And they knew that you meant the very first day. So I guess what I'm really saying is they're using, as though the real objective of the person writing the Greek, had to do with how an English speaker would, say first day of the fifth month. But that would not have been their concern, and that's why I guess, and I'm being redundant. I'm sorry, but that's why I think they write one, because they know when they are speaking, it conjures the right picture in their minds. It just like the first day of the fifth month conjures a picture in our mind of what that means. We just immediately visualize it. Well, they were immediately visualizing with meaton minos, I think. But then, because in the same way that our legal precedent, the idea of precedent becomes something then that, well, I'll come back to that if I can. So let me go on to item 3 here, and I'm sorry, Ken, but obviously I've already been talking about item 3, but I'll just really just say that this is kind of, I agree that they would, like I was saying, it would conjure in their mind when you say one of the month, and you're just agreeing with that. You're saying, yes, absolutely. And then the burden is being able to translate into proper English. Well, day 1 of the second month isn't how we commonly speak English. I understand that entirely, and that's what I was just saying. You said it better. Great. Instead, we idiomatically say the first day of the second month. I get all of that. But that's, how we would translate into English and speak idiomatically or, culturally, how we would say things would not have been their concern. And it really doesn't change what they would have intended by that. But I think we all agree that their intent would be the equivalence of, in English, the first day of the second month or day 1 of the second month, either one. And anything else would generally sound odd. Agree with all of that. But that's an English concern, in my opinion. However, in English, there's a vast difference between first day and one day. Absolutely. You got no argument there. Two different things entirely. Ordinal and, I shouldn't say ordinal, I don't really, but I know the difference between the two, and I'd accept the translation of day 1 of the month, but not one day of the month. Me too. Regardless of how we translate it in the context of coin, it's quite clear it's common that mia in relation to a time period is idiomatically understood as a first day. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Good. That's kind of what I was saying, and I may have even gotten some of that thought from you when I was doing that work. So good. Thank you. Item 4, you ask, why can't it be one of the Sabbath days? And you said, because there are other ways that would be expressed. If we're referring to a Sabbath day, not a specific one, the commonly used idiom, Idiomatic Sabbaton, would almost positively have been used. And I did, let me find it here. Okay, here it is, using OpenL to translate. It would have been on the day of the Sabbath. So you're basically saying that this would have been the translation they would have used. And I would agree, there would be a point when they would say on the day of the Sabbath. There would be, just like we would have a very specific use of saying on the day of the Sabbath. That could be one of the things that they were saying. Then you go on to, and would almost positively have been used. And going back to my original comment on the older video, if it were a specific Sabbath, such as the first in the cycle of Sabbaths. Okay. Now, this is interesting because this is what I want to come back to. So when you say cycle of Sabbaths, then I'm thinking you are talking about like the 52 Sabbaths, and then you're talking about the first of those 52 Sabbaths, because there are 52 Sabbaths, common, ordinary Sabbaths in a year, special but ordinary, common Sabbaths in the year. And if you're talking about the first, okay, or the second, or the third, I guess. And if that was meant, you're saying it would have been expressed as tu hini ton Sabbaton. And just to go, make sure which one it is. Yeah, then I pulled that one up, and that would be on the one of the Sabbaths, which, is kind of how I think it, as I've seen others translate it, on one of the Sabbaths. And this has a different meaning than on the day of the Sabbath. It means something else than on one of the Sabbaths. It would even in English, it would be a different meaning. We would speak it trying to convey um, a specific what we're trying to delineate the day that we're speaking of. And then there was one more, because I know that you had also offered in that first reply this revision where we turned this into on singular Sabbath on, and then that translates to on the one Sabbath. Well, that also could specifically, all three of these have different meanings, really, potentially in the English language. I could say on the one Sabbath, on that one Sabbath, speaking of that particular one Sabbath, or I could say on one of those Sabbaths, which is, I think, the intent here, and on the day of the Sabbath. So you could say, well, it was on the Sabbath day that it happened, and you are affirming that it happened on a day of the Sabbath. And that stands in contrast to on one of the Sabbaths. Nuanced but different, I think. So let me go back to what you wrote here and see if I can. Sabbath in Acts 27 to Henny. Okay, same thing, using a neuter numeral. And indeed, we do see a similar, though not exact, parallel to this in Acts 17, Epi Sabbaton, on 3 Sabbaths. Okay, I didn't look at that. Let me go look at that very quickly. Okay, so in that passage, Paul reasoned for 3 Sabbaths, not any specific 3 in a row, apparently. Well, I guess it didn't have to be 3 in a row, but it isn't necessarily like the 5th of 52 or the 7th of 52 or just says for 3 Sabbaths he went in, 3 Sabbath days he went in and reasoned with them, I believe is what it was. Okay. So I am calling this instant out, which is not translated as week, because this is how we would normally see numerical references to the actual Sabbath in Greek. Normally see. So something like this Sabbaton on 3. Okay. All right. So I think I'm following that. And we have the cardinal number, the ordinal being used with the cardinal meaning is mostly only seen in the first numeral. We have the cardinal number. The ordinal being used with the cardinal meaning is mostly only seen with the first numeral. Okay, I mean, I can reason out what I think you mean by that. Inflected with the same gender, number, and case as Sabbaton. In this situation, accusative, neuter, plural, accusative, respectively. Thus, the numeral directly apply or modifies Sabbaton to read 3 Sabbaths. Okay. Had the author intended 3rd Sabbath, he would have used the ordinal number. Okay, that's what I was just saying, and you're now explaining why that would make sense. Okay, very good. Why aren't they using hebdoma? We cannot completely answer that, however. Okay, so let me finish my thought. Let's see if I can do this. I think that when this phrase is used, which is literally one of the Sabbaths, and we clearly have a misalignment of the adjective and the noun, but it's obviously conjuring something. It gives a visual to these folks, and they know what they mean. Now, I would say that that when they say this word, it could, because there is this idea. I mean, they have to separate the Sabbaths, because not all Sabbaths were the same. They had, first of all, there were, as I said, the weekly common and ordinary Sabbaths versus other Sabbaths associated with the Moedim, and versus trying to get specific with a numerical Sabbath, trying to identify which specific Sabbath in the course of a year you might have been trying to talk about. But when you are referencing just one of the Sabbaths, if you're going to say, well, on one of the Sabbaths or one of the Sabbath days, I think that it seems reasonable anyway, that when they spoke this, again, not worrying about how English-speaking people would receive it, they knew what this meant. The people of the time, the Greek-speaking people of the time, knew what this meant. They know whether they meant a seventh day, the Sabbath, one of the Sabbaths, one of the weekly Sabbaths. They would know, that would conjure to them whether they were speaking of one of the Sabbath days, or whether or not they were speaking as you had mentioned in one of the others, that one day removed of the Sabbath, it would conjure that. It potentially they knew, and so it's conjuring something, and they understood it to be either one of the Sabbath days, the day removed of the Sabbath day, or something ordinal like the first day. And then when we say the first day, we're going to have to come up with something. First day of what? Like first day of the week, and is that why we turned Sabbath into week? I don't know. But what I am saying is, what I am reasoning is that this clearly conveyed a specific meaning. They knew, and they didn't have to do all these gymnastics that English-speaking people are trying to do to figure out what they meant all those centuries ago, millennia ago, in cultures across using Koine Greek and other things. But they knew which day. We're trying to reason it out. And of the three things I've heard, one of the Sabbaths, literally, which will put it on on a Saturday, a seventh day. They wouldn't have called it Saturday. I don't think so by that time. Somewhat, I guess. But they knew they meant the seventh day, if that's what they meant. Or they knew if they meant one day removed of the Sabbath, or which would effectively then be, and I think that's how you're reasoning, that would be the first day of the week. And the fact that we are missing day and have to insert day is the rationale for inserting this ordinal first of the week. Well, I would just say that if this conjured one of the Sabbaths, no, we don't. I don't think we have to go ordinal, and it doesn't require that. And to go back to what you had offered here, where they would have said, and let me get it here. They would have said, which one was it? Is it this one, where they would have said on the day of the Sabbath? Well, no, not necessarily. I don't think, because on the day of the Sabbath is one way of saying it. But if they had a colloquial, idiomatic, whatever the correct word is for that, they understood when you are saying Miaton Sabbaton, you are referencing just one of the Sabbaths. It's just a common reference to a common weekly Sabbath, versus saying on, and if that's the case, maybe you could say on the day of the Sabbath. But if colloquially and if idiomatically, that's not how they were saying it. Apparently they were saying Miaton Sabbaton colloquially and idiomatically for whatever they meant it to mean. And if they meant it to mean on the day of the Sabbath or one of the Sabbath days, okay. But then the question is, did they really mean it then to, okay. So what I'm saying is that, this might be correct and would have achieved a very similar outcome to Miaton Sabbaton, but that would not have been the common use of the language. But if the common use of the language was just going to conjure the correct, and they understood it to be one of the Sabbaths or one of the Sabbath days, or what did that say specifically? Or the day of the Sabbath. They might have understood it to mean the day of the Sabbath. That's one of the possibilities, of what they meant, possibly. But what I'm saying has happened is that, or what I'm reasoning and what I'm offering is that at some point in time, people have decided that they must mean for those 9 occurrences, or actually not 9, for those 7 occurrences, the only 7 occurrences, they would have been, and then using maybe the Septuagint as their rationale, because there was a use of that day 1, meaning the first day of the month. And you can take that rationale, and like you would in the legal precedents, in the law of precedents, where once you've established something, you now use it to judge other things by. It becomes the standard by which other things get judged. And so then we are saying first day of the week, and then we can rationalize it out. And to do that, we would, it would have said, I think you would have said it would have been day 1, a day removed of the Sabbath would have been a literal concept of it. But I just struggle to be convinced of that, because this is that 7 times, which is rare, using precedents from specific things in the Septuagint, we have turned this into the first day of the week or a day removed of the week. And I just don't know that we ever had to do that. Can it be justified? Is it possible? Yes, it all can be possible. But must that be the explanation and the only explanation? And when I factor in other things that I've been studying and doing, it doesn't seem to be the better of the two explanations. I think the literal meaning that they meant when they say this, they are conjuring one of the Sabbaths, or on the Sabbath day, or on the Sabbath day. However you want to say it, they understood this to be a Sabbath, one of the common Sabbath days. I think that seems more reasonable when I am considering other aspects that I've been studying in the last 5 or 6 years. So I guess that's what I'm saying, is that while I understand why we're coming up with first day of the week and we can't do it, I don't think it's the only explanation, and I really don't even think it's the best explanation. And I haven't really heard anything yet. I mean, I'm learning so much, but I haven't heard anything yet that has convinced me that this, what they say and what that conjured in their mind, would be something other than one of the Sabbaths. I haven't heard anything yet that outweighs the other things that I've been dealing with and coming about. None of them have stood. And I guess that's where I stand at the moment. I think, and if you've said it plainly, I've missed it. I mean, I'm having to infer what all you say, but I really think you embrace the first day of the week as representative of what this means. I think that's what you're saying, which is really, what all the translators, when people are getting together, the NASB and the group of translators, they're coming up with this, and how can I argue with that? I don't know. But if they're using if they're all starting with that first rationale, maybe that precedence and that concept, and if they're also being influenced by church teaching, that it must mean that the resurrection was on that first day of the week and that it all moved over. If they're already being influenced by church teaching, then they have reason to move in that direction when they don't necessarily, through precedent, through church teaching, when they don't necessarily, though, by strength of the actual language, have a reason to emphatically call it first day of the week. All right, Ken, I don't know how well I've communicated this, and all I know is that I thank you again for engaging. I am learning so much, and really, at the end of the day, if I'm wrong, I need to be corrected. But if I'm right, and so far I'm seeing things, I can reason things that keep me thinking maybe I'm not ready to relinquish yet, because I haven't had anything convince me emphatically that it must be first day of the week versus one of the Sabbaths. I mean, I get why we're in the English trying to reason this out, but when this was spoken by them, by the Greek speaker to the Greek reader, to the Greek hearer, they knew what it meant. And we're trying to figure out what they meant. And it was either the Sabbath day or one day removed of the Sabbath. And that's what we're arguing. I think it would be one of the Sabbath days, and I haven't heard anything yet that moves me off of that. All right, Ken, I'm rambling, and I just thank you. All right, bye-bye.